Go.
Okay.
Hey, good morning. This is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic. Today is Tuesday, April 16th. Thank you for joining us today. The purpose of today's podcast is the U.S. government has opened up time to respond to the proposed FBAR regulations. Those came out. John and I did a short little episode on that on Friday, basically showing people how to get there. If you go in the link of the description below, you'll see that direct link because I'll show you where it takes you. The link will take you straight to, hang on one second and get this up here. The link will take you to, where is that, John? I got to find this here. You had that right in the post, right? Here we go. Oh, here it is. Got it right here. And I'm going to put this in the super chat because the link is kind of hard to find. So I'll put this in a second as it comes up on my screen. I'm going to put this in hold on. Hold on. I'm listening to myself. All right, so there we go. And now, here you go. Here it is. This is where you can comment. So take a look in the super chat. Here it is. It's a kind of a common, and it's also in the description below. So this is where you could leave your FBAR comments about the proposed regulations, okay? Now, first thing is, I guess we should probably go to the regulations as they are right now, okay? And this is a great starting point. Here's where the regulations are right now. We're on the Cornell School of Law website. This is the regulation. And I think this is what's really, really fascinating when you read this regulation. And it's really fast. It's really interesting. Here it is, reports of foreign financial accounts. Now, I just want to briefly show something to you. This purports to be the FBAR regulation, okay? And just notice something right away. That's the regulation, reports of foreign financial accounts. Very quickly, here is, let me get to the FBAR law. Notice how it says records and reports on foreign financial agency transactions. Well, that's weird, right? The regulation says reports of foreign financial accounts. The law says something else. Records and reports on foreign financial agency transactions. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Well, let's just continue a little bit. So here's the regulation. This is the regulation that is currently basically the law on FBAR. It says, and this is the point I want to get to right here, each United States person having a financial interest in or signature or other authority over a bank, securities, or other financial account in a foreign country shall report such relationship to the Commissioner of Internal Revenue for each year in which such relationship exists and shall provide such information as specified in reporting form prescribed under, and this is right here, prescribed under 31 U.S.C. 5314 to be filed by such persons. The form prescribed under section 5314 is report of foreign bank and financial accounts, TDF 90-222.1, or any successor forms. Okay, let's challenge this regulation right here now. Let's do it really quickly. Well, let's see here. Can we find anywhere in this law where it says foreign financial? Can we find a foreign report of financial accounts in here in FBAR? The answer is no, we can't. We actually can't find that in here. What this law actually requires, it requires the Secretary of Treasury shall require a resident or citizen of the United States or a person in and doing business in the United States to keep record, file reports, and keep records and file reports when the resident, citizen, or person makes a transaction or maintains a relation for any person with a foreign financial agency. The record, now, I clicked on this. What's a financial agency? Financial agency means a person acting for a person, okay? Your foreign agent is not a financial institution. The Act defines financial agent as a person. Now, when we go back, and if we go back to where the other definition of, well, maybe foreign financial agent can mean a bank somehow. We'll just take a broad reading of it. Well, got a problem with that too. Because if we go back to the definitions of financial institution, wait a second. This is a bank. Financial institution means bank. So when the law speaks about foreign financial agents, it means a person. It doesn't mean a bank. It can't mean both things. So the current interpretation of 5314 to prescribe a report of foreign bank accounts isn't even actually, it's not factually true. It's not true. And so that's where I would say the top legal argument to the FBAR is that the regulation claims the law exists that doesn't exist. And it's nonsensical to believe that they would have defined foreign financial agent specifically, and they would define foreign financial institution specifically, but in the end of it, they actually mean the same thing. They mean the same exact thing, which is illogical. And so that's always been my biggest problem with the FBAR, is that the regulation itself is completely divorced from the law. It's illegal. There's no even, and this wouldn't even pass a Chevron standard in my mind. This wouldn't even pass a Chevron deference standard, where the courts typically say, well, hey, look, agency, as long as your interpretation is reasonable, we'll defer to your reason. But this is an unreasonable interpretation because you basically took out an entire part of the law. You took out two things that meant two different things, and you say they mean one thing. Well, that's an unreasonable interpretation in my mind. And that's what I'm going to put in my comment. Now, what I want to talk about is other ideas. These are my ideas, and I love my ideas. I love talking to myself all the time. But I want to talk, and I want to go over other legal challenges to this, and also other practical challenges to the FBAR enforcement. Some of those. So I really hope to see if I get a discussion going, because maybe I'm missing something, and I hope some of you have some great information you could share with us about other things maybe we're not thinking about. Some other reasons why with it. So with that, I want to turn it over to my lovely host, John Richardson. The great John Richardson is joining us today, along with Keith Redmond. Thank you so much for joining me today, gentlemen.
So he's great, and I'm not great. Wow.
You're okay. You're okay, Keith. I know the great John Richardson, Keith Redmond.
Yeah, right.
No offense, Keith. Right. So there. All right, so with Keith, why don't I hand it over to you though? Let me with that slight that I gave you. I'll let you go first. How about that?
Oh, okay. Well, aren't you generous? Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you said. I guess where my mind is vis-a-vis people making comments is the practicality or impracticality of doing FBARs, and I'll give you one really classic example of where it becomes a problem is that you have an American overseas who is allegedly needs to fill out an FBAR on his or her accounts. Okay. However, the non-American is also on those accounts, and the non-American does not give permission to the American, whether that be the wife or the husband, for example, to do so. So that American is caught between a rock and a hard place. You see what I mean? And so it just creates more of a problem. Or that American happens to be a signatory, let's say, on a French company's French bank account that earns French money, and they're supposed to report that account or any of those accounts that they're signatories on to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network in the United States. That's not going to work. And it puts people in a very difficult situation. Those are two that come to mind quite often.
Keith, thank you for that. Those are two things I didn't think about. Those are absolutely two really powerful practical problems with FBAR implementation. John, do you have any? Do you have any practical problems you think that are issues with the FBAR regulation?
Well, I certainly agree with what Keith said, but I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The purpose of the statute, I don't think the purpose of the statute, it's unclear what the purpose of the statute is, interestingly, right? It's an old statute.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really good point. Let me get that up again, because the old statute is it's really weird, because when you read the preface of it, like, what is this about? Because, right, when you read the preface, it's like, considering the need to avoid impeding or controlling the export or import of monetary instruments. So this is actually a regulation that is only speaking to monetary instruments. So another problem with it is that that, wait a second, this is for monetary instruments. A bank account may hold on it monetary instruments, but a bank account is not a monetary instrument. A monetary instrument is something that can be transferred. And the need to avoid burdening unreasonably a person making a transaction with a foreign financial agency. Right? That's the purpose of this, is to streamline something.
It's clearly the opposite. Okay. I mean, that part of it's one of the most outrageous lies of all time. You know, Anthony, going back to the Bittner case, and thinking specifically of listening to the live argument, one thing that was very, very interesting was Justice Jackson spent some time actually, reading the statute and trying to figure out, what it actually meant. And when you divorce the statute from the regulations, okay, it's not clear really, what it's about. And that's what's kind of interesting. And what has happened over the years, very clearly, regardless of your view of this, is that the content of the regulations have actually been used to interpret the statute. I think.
Yes.
People.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Exactly right. It's like, well, look, and as you see the form prescribed under 5314 is you're telling us what the law is. It doesn't say that.
Yeah. To be clear, Anthony has the regulations.
Yep.
Up right now.
Yeah.
Right?
I just switched over to the regulations. Right. So I'm switching back between the law and the regulations right here.
Yeah.
So this is the regulations, right? Like what? It doesn't say that. It's like this is you're so supposed to believe. I would say this for those of us who maybe watch too much Star Trek, is that you're supposed to believe there are 5 lights when there are 4, right? This is clear. This is gaslighting. This is government gaslighting at its finest. You're saying the law says this. No, it doesn't say that. It's not there. You can't quote it. It's not there.
Well, there may be people who would disagree on that, okay? But on my more narrow point, okay, and I hadn't really thought of this until just a second ago. So these are good opportunities to rethink this stuff, these podcasts, right? But it really seems pretty obvious that the content of the regulations is used to interpret the statute and not the other way around, right?
Well said.
And that was really, I think, on display. I mean, anybody who's interested in this, there's not many people. If you were to listen to the audio in the Bittner case, very, very interesting sort of thought experiment, right, from Justice Jackson on this particular point, right? And what was evident was that she was actually trying to understand the statute, okay? Becoming almost a revolutionary idea and sort of the interpretation of law generally, right? But Anthony, I think what is important for listeners to understand here, and I think this is absolutely not controversial, is that the meaning of the FBAR statute, the rules that are made up under it, the statute itself doesn't prescribe the $10,000 thing, for example. That's totally Treasury.
Right. Right.
The application, does it apply to Americans abroad or not? All of this is absolutely, a creation of Treasury, right?
Yeah, and if we could just go back, I'm going back to the law right now to say, if we look at the law.
Down to B, right? Let's stop there. Stop.
Yep.
Yeah, stop there. I mean, if you look at it after, paragraph A, who knows what the hell that means? But, then it says the secretary may prescribe. Now this is really important. I want to overdo this.
Good.
Will, because it's so important. So just bear with me, okay? But where I'm going with this is that the way people experience FBAR, the way it's applied, is absolutely 100% the result of the Treasury Secretary, right, and the executive branch of the government. Now, what that means is that the fix here, or a fix, would be for different regulations. Okay, for example, raise the reporting to 100,000 or 200,000 or match it to, FATCA.
Well, I would just say, do some basis to say what's the amount, because the FBAR is apparently, from Treasury, it's for terrorism, to fight terrorism. So maybe we need to figure out, well, what's the minimum amount of money that could actually do terrorism? And
that's a thought. That's a thought. But the key point here is that I think that a lot of people may have the idea that this is the result of some law, some congressional law, and it's absolutely not.
It's not. Yeah.
And Janet Yellen could change this basically. I don't mean literally the stroke of a pen, but you get my point, right? By directing a change in the regulation. And this is what I think. You talk about comments. What I think, it's very interesting. We've talked about how the Democrats are in overdrive trying to, by God, we want that offshore vote. We want to inflict that offshore vote on places like Arizona and Georgia. We want their elections decided by people who don't even live in the state, right? Yeah. But at the same time, they want to punish the offshore account, right? Which they define as, these locally held accounts that Americans abroad use. And I would like to propose, a substantive fix and a possibility for how to deal with this in this election year. Now, I think that all Americans abroad fully understand that their accounts are actually local. And I think we touched on this a little earlier. In 2015, Russia, not exactly perceived to be a model of freedom and all that, created their own FBAR law. As far as I can see, it's exactly the same as the U.S. FBAR law. I mean, if you're looking for oppression, look no further than U.S. Treasury as your example, right? But so Russia has residence-based taxation. Interestingly, they defined resident for the purpose of their laws, including citizens. Interesting expansion, right, in the Russian law. But you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
Excluded citizens who lived outside Russia for more than a year, right? So even the Russian FBAR law, right, the Kremlin, if you will, may be taking its lead from U.S. Treasury, all right?
But they're not as depraved.
It's a kinder, gentler nation to its citizens abroad than the United States is.
Yeah, not a surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, I just want to interrupt here because we're stopping on this section just only highlights what I was saying previously, because we have the secretary may prescribe a reasonable classification of persons subject to or exempt from a requirement under this section. So one solution would be to say, hey, look, you should exempt people who live outside the United States because they're not foreign to them.
Yeah, I would do it. Absolutely right, Anthony. I would do it very precisely and surgically like this. I would say any U.S. citizen who meets the bona fide residence test under Section 911, right, the Foreign Earned Income Exclusion section of the Internal Revenue Code, is exempt from reporting accounts in that particular country, right?
Right, because for them, they live there and they're using the account. So there's no greater risk that they're using their money for terrorism than anybody else, right? So,
well, for them,
if you're overseas, you're a suspect class. While you're there. The government definitely has a way of treating U.S. expats terribly. So that would be one solution. But that's the problem. The problem, John, is that everybody, the U.S. expats are particularly punished because they have no constituency. That's why all these things exist. So.
That is true. That is true. But what's also true is that this is an election year, and the Democrats in particular are doing their best to get the offshore vote. So my suggestion is this, that I think Americans abroad need to come together, under sort of the mantra, that no offshore vote unless offshore fix.
No offshore vote. So something like that. No offshore vote unless offshore fix. Okay.
And then explain what's meant, okay? Because, the point is this, that if the Democrats are serious about getting the offshore vote, right? These are strange people, right? Boy, we want that offshore vote. We want to punish our own residents by watering down their votes through the offshore vote. That's what this really is, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
We want to essentially round up votes, people who, have no, they go so far as they're looking for people who maybe were born to a U.S. parent outside and you never even lived there. They
Yes.
want these people to vote.
Yes.
This is absolutely
We want your vote. Yeah.
despicable, and to use a Hillary Clinton term, deplorable.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it really is. I mean, we've talked about this before. I don't think these people should be able to vote at all, but that's just my opinion. But here's the key point. Americans abroad ought to be able to leverage this to say, you know what? Basically, unless we have a commitment from the administration, okay, who has total control over this, that they are going to end this oppression, okay, this requirement that we file our accounts down the street that we use for our everyday activities, that we share with our spouses, that we don't have to report this to financial crimes, then guess what? No offshore vote for you this year.
No offshore vote for you. Yeah. Well, all right. Well, I'm going to turn it over for Keith for his comments on that. Keith, so what do you think the chances of that working are? Do you think we can mobilize the expat vote to say, hey, look, you want our vote, you Democrats abroad? I mean, I get there, I watch, I listen to stuff. Do you think there's any chance that Democrats abroad would say, yep, you know what, you got to do this if you want our FBAR vote?
It sounds reasonable and logical, but the reality on the ground is I don't see them doing it.
Well,
But
you
it
know,
does sound
what
reasonable.
I don't
What?
see Americans abroad buying into this. They'd rather, I mean, they are
Yeah.
these are strange people, okay? You know, I think they love their persecution. I think that the average American abroad probably supports FBAR for them.
Well,
It's regarded as a way of the government in contact with them.
yeah. You know, John, I agree.
Embassy or something.
I agree and I disagree with you. The part that I disagree on first is that, you know, Americans abroad are broken down into subsegments of that population. So when you have the American immigrant who is permanently living outside the United States, I think they would be all for it, you know, to get rid of the FBAR and to do what it takes to get rid of it. But when you take a look at the other American expat population, short-term Americans overseas, etc., they're not going to be for it.
Why would they not be for it? Well, who would want
They
to
don't care.
form
Yeah,
for financial
they don't care.
crimes?
They don't care.
Because the reason why they don't care, because a lot of them, they're there. You know, again, we've discussed this before. When your financial center of gravity is still not outside the United States, it's not a big deal. It really isn't a big deal. If your financial center of gravity is in the United States and you're overseas, compliance should be like, why is everyone having a problem with it? It's not a big deal.
You're only overseas for a little bit of time.
And then usually what happens is your employer will pay for your compliance. So you're just like, okay, there's more stuff I had to report and I had to mention a bank account, but that's about it. But, you know, for the person, so I would say the person who's there, you know, for, you know, a 2-3 year period, going to come back to the U.S. It's not a big deal. They're not going to care. And then I would say for the expat, and this is what I've encountered. It's just the tribalism. The tribalism is disgusting. That people are locked. Keith, what I mean is this. Yeah. You've decided to live overseas because that's where your home is. But yet you need to make sure that your vote counts to implement U.S. domestic policy.
Right.
You yourself have admitted, no, you know what? I don't want to live in the U.S. anymore. I want to live here. Please respect that. But you know what? At the same point, you know what? I heard, and I see the political pandering that goes on, and you know, making sure that expats are kept in their cocoon of ignorance. And like, well, you better do this, otherwise, you know, the bad guys in Washington will get here, and you'll have a dictatorship. I mean, well, what do we have here? We have an invented regulation that, again, is defining the law, not the other way around. So if we're looking for that dictatorship, if we're looking for that terrible thing, guess what, guys? We have it. We have it. It's here today. We don't need to wait 20 years for a dystopian future. It's here today. I didn't really think it was going to be so sunny. That's what surprised me about the dystopian future. I didn't know the sun was going to be out as much as it is. That's the upside. But I don't think that the tribalism of expats, Democrats abroad, I'm sorry, they just go. You know, they're more concerned with what the abortion policy is in Florida than whether or not the government will seize all of their bank accounts, all their information because they missed to file a form. It's more important. It's more important that, well, hold on a second. There's somebody in Florida who doesn't have the right to abortion. Oh, wait a second. That's my number one issue.
And
meanwhile,
that's for
you're
homeland Americans, but for Americans overseas, that's where I agree with you, Anthony.
yeah,
There's
you
a
left the country.
yeah,
Shut up.
yeah, yeah.
Shut up is kind of why? Why do
Focus
you
on
want to
your
impose?
issues and what the U.S. is doing to you as an
Right,
American living outside the United States permanently,
right. Because
or
when yeah,
Americans who have never lived in the United States. It affects them as well. We can't forget that population as well. There are Americans who have never lived in the United States, and they're subjected to this stuff.
well, and here you go. Here's a comment from Suzanne. You know, because Suzanne renounced, family that renounces together stays together. Congratulations on Suzanne, and she's still getting harassed. You know, she's still getting harassed by,
The bank.
by the banks, right? And and by the way, we always said this. Like, well, the only country in the world to impose, the only other country in the world to impose citizenship-based taxation is sort of the Eritrea. It can never
Right.
happen. But I would say this, and I would say that, yeah, they are more reasonable. Cal, I appreciate your comment, because it's far more reasonable because they're not out to punish you for not filing a form that isn't the most obvious form in the world to file.
Anthony, honestly, look, to be clear, to compare the policies of Eritrea to the policies of the United States is a gross, gross insult to the nation of Eritrea.
It is.
Okay, because the United States is so much worse, right? And it's the same thing, if we look at the whole FBAR thing, Russia, in the context of a clear attempt to go after people with foreign accounts, right, is far more reasonable than the United States. I mean, there's simply no question about it.
All right. So, all right, I have another practical impact of this one. You ready for this one?
Yeah.
There's no intelligence value to an FBAR. There is no intelligence value to the FBAR. And how we know this is because FinCEN has said so themselves. FinCEN has said so to say, you know what, these filed FBARs, there's nothing to do with them. You know what, we don't want to administer them. So it's so useless to FinCEN that they offshore enforcement of the FBAR and penalties to the IRS. Wait. And it's like, wait a second. What does FinCEN stand for? It stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I think you could hear my underlining of crimes, right? It's a criminal form. It's a criminal form that the agency in charge of it says, yeah, it's worthless to us because anyone doing a crime isn't going to tell us about the crime. So it goes off. Now, this criminal form is used as the basis for civil penalties that are ruinous, that are utterly ruinous. And so, wait a second. Why do you guys want this regulation? Your agency can't even handle it. You send it off to another subpart of Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service. But this is not really the crime fighting tool it's supposed to be, right? That seems to be a problem with that. John, do you see it as the crime fighting tool that it was claimed to be?
No, not at all. I used to, it's a fundraising mechanism. All right, the local PTA has a bake sale. The U.S. government has an FBAR fundraiser, right? You need some money, just go out, penalize some people, terrorize them, etc. But look, I think there's a broader philosophical issue here that I think we ought to at least get into this conversation. Okay, when you look at this, right? And it gives me no pleasure to say this, but I think if you look at this critically, I think that it tells you a great deal about what the U.S. government thinks U.S. citizenship is, right? And, to pick up on Suzanne's comment a minute ago, the harassment never ends. The point is that the view of the U.S. government is that U.S. citizenship gives the government a property interest in the individual. Okay, that's the whole point, right? And because the government effectively owns its citizens, it has the right to regulate all aspects of their behavior all the time, wherever they may be in the world. Now, this is, very much a notion of citizenship, from 100 years ago or something. And, sooner or later, particularly, in light of cases like Ephorium and that, I think that the U.S. government needs to rethink what citizenship actually means. Okay. And, sure, the FBAR thing is a problem. Sure, citizenship taxation is a problem, but it all comes from the notion that citizenship is not about the individual, but it's about the government, the state that has ownership of these carbon life forms, right? And so this is, for example, this is the whole philosophy of, citizenship taxation, which all it really means practically is that the U.S. imposes taxation on people who live in other countries who they're essentially reaching out and claiming as U.S. citizens, right? And this is the problem here. As long as U.S. citizenship means, okay, not freedom, that's crazy, right? But means that you're essentially a subject of the U.S. government. It's hard to get change here. It's as though, right? It's almost as though the War of 1812, as you may or may not know, was fought largely over the notion that Britain took the position that British subjects were forever British subjects, right? Okay. And, once a British subject, that's it. And now we see whatever, a couple hundred years later, we see the U.S. taking exactly the same position, right? That, American citizens are subjects, right? So it's come full circle. British subjects, the British subjects of 2024 are actually citizens, and American citizens of 2024 are actually subjects, right?
We are subjects. And John, to just underline your point about citizenship-based taxation. Now, folks, Elon Musk says, "Hey, look, we're going to go to Mars. We're going to go to Mars." Now, the question I have is, if you have a job on Mars, you're a citizen, is it taxable by the IRS? And the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah, it's in the Internal Revenue Code.
It's yes. If you make it's really another word for citizenship-based taxation is universal tax jurisdiction. That means anywhere in the universe you are owned by the United States government, and they get a cut of whatever you make, whether you like it or not, which you don't like, but guess what? They get it anyway. That's universal tax jurisdiction. And that's how far away we've fallen from the thing we allegedly rebelled against, right? We rebelled against the British tyranny to jump in a pot of even more tyranny. That's even more ridiculous.
Far worse. To be clear, Anthony, the British, in taxing the colonies, or at least taxing their colonies, U.S. citizenship taxation taxes other countries, other sovereign nations. I mean, this is 1,000 times worse. And again, to compare, in a sense, the United States to the British is again a gross insult to the British.
Yes. Yes. King George III was not that bad of a guy.
Well, not in comparison to what's going on.
Not at all. Not at all. This is so much worse than anything. It's worse than any. The reality is worse than any fiction, and that's why it's hard for me to read fiction, because reality is so much worse than these doomsday scenarios. What we have right now, because the problem is that people are asleep, and you're not. It's like you're getting abused, and you're just not doing any, and you're going along with it. That's the frightening part. Is when you see these people just march off like, yes, this is a good thing, and not challenging it, not looking into it, and walking around all these brainwashed people believing the government's on their side. That is the terror, folks. That's the terror, let me tell you. And so here's the comment from Suzanne, just to give you a little backup on the ownership the United States government has in you. She had to go through various security background checks in her past employment, having to explain why you have to file with FinCEN. Again, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network is not a lot of fun and applies when it's a criminal. Exactly.
But all U.S. citizens are presumptive criminals, Anthony. I mean, understand how these laws work, right? Something like, the FBAR requirement, right? It's basically, it might as well say, we presume that all American citizens, wherever they may be in the world, are criminals. And those who have foreign accounts outside the United States are required to file forms to prove they're not, right? So we have essentially I would say, a universal presumption of criminality here.
So I would say that, and I'm going to put that down in the legal side of things. There, it's a presumption. It's like you basically flipped the standard of proof. That no longer do you need to prove. Does a state need to prove by a reasonable doubt that you're a crime? You need to prove by a reasonable doubt that you are not a criminal. So I think we have.
I think that's probably true. Pretty much, yeah.
Presumption of innocence.
And Anthony, another way of viewing this, just trying to come up with imaging that people might understand. This one's directed more at resident Americans who probably, if you're listening at all, probably have some doubts about this. But for resident Americans, let me try it this way, okay? There's a product in the market called an invisible dog fence, right? Where if your dog gets far enough off a property, it gets an electric shock to send it back. And really, the combination of citizenship, taxation, FATCA, FBAR, etc., are the equivalent of an invisible dog fence, right? Where basically you get too far, you're going to be punished by all this, right? So,
Yeah.
to understand citizenship, taxation, and FBAR, just go to YouTube and put in invisible dog fence, okay? And you'll see, in practical terms, how it really works. Now, another aspect of this.
All right. Well, Judge, I got to respond to your analogy there because it's great. This is the problem I have, John, is that many people, they think their collar looks great on them. They love that little collar. Ooh, look at this. I mean, somebody, see, I have this collar on me. I could be shocked randomly for some reason. Who knows? That means I'm a good American. That's the problem.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's sad, but I think that it's only a very small percentage of Americans abroad who even support change. Most of them are perfectly happy with this for whatever reasons they may have. Well, the reasons they have is because they don't feel impacted particularly personally by it. They don't care that their neighbor is. No, there's no principle here whatsoever. Or rather, the principle is, if it doesn't affect me personally, I don't care, right?
Well, I don't have a lot of money in your bank account, so what?
Well, yeah, that's exactly
that's really that's what you wind up with. Oh, good. They have more than I do, and it's just the jealousy and all the worst of humanity that you see. So it's pretty awful on that. Which brings me to what you're saying brings me to the next problem with it is that we said there's no intelligence value. Well, it's actually kind of a useless burden other than it gives the government a penalty of bonanza. When the FBAR regulations created the FBAR law, which is, I think, the true way to say it, because there is no FBAR law. The regulations are the law, which means that Congress doesn't matter. Unelected bureaucrats get to decide what the law is, and it's very clear here, very clear. But the problem for those unelected bureaucrats is they got something else. They actually did get a law. They actually did get an actual law that required you to report your foreign bank accounts. And that law was called the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. And so I say, well, one practical problem with the FBAR is you have a somewhat duplicative reporting requirement. Now, the 8938 was created because the IRS had difficulty accessing FinCEN's records. Because they need it's hard to get us that database. We don't know what it is, but give us an 8938, the form 8938. That's something we can access. It's in our database. It's part of Title 26. The FBAR's Title 31. It's not in the same place. So they got, it's like, well, that's funny. You seem to get the law that you, and I don't really challenge. I'm not challenging FATCA. It's a terrible law. It's a terrible, awful law and wrong for many reasons and wrong. But the regulations are actually based on the law. But what we have with the FBAR, it's not based on the law whatsoever. It's not. And that's my question. Well, where is that? Where's that report of foreign agents? Where's that report of foreign agents? Treasury is supposed to create that report of foreign agents. Where is it? I looked for it. It's not there. So Treasury is the one violating the law. If we look at the law, Treasury is the one violating the 5314. Because Treasury is supposed to create that form for foreign agents, which it has not done, but it has illogically concluded a foreign agent is a foreign financial institution.
Yeah, Anthony, on that point, going back to the the statute itself, right? So 5314 does not impose, to be clear, does not impose any requirement whatsoever on an individual. Okay.
Mm.
Look at it. Here we have, it only speaks to the Secretary of the Treasury, right?
The
Okay.
secretary shall require, right.
Right. Now, fascinating, if you flip down to 5321, which is the penalty provision.
5321. Okay. 5321. All right.
I think it's A5. A5. You
We're
want
getting,
you want 5321. Keep going.
oh, civil penalties. Okay. Here we go.
I think you get down to 5, subparagraph 5. Yeah, stop there. Now,
Wait a second. Wait a second. There, John. It says foreign financial agency transaction violation. Again,
yeah,
we're talking about agent, which is defined to be a person.
yeah, okay.
Oh.
Don't go too far with this. I think there's something even more basic here. If you look at penalty authorized, right? It says the Secretary of the Treasury may impose a civil penalty on any person who violates or causes a violation of any provision of 5314. Well, no individual can violate 5314. Only the Treasury Secretary can, right? By the express terms of the statute. So really, this penalty provision is completely nonsensical, except as provided. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. The Secretary of the Treasury may impose on any person who violates, or causes a violation of 5314. No individual can violate 5314. Only the Treasury Secretary.
Yeah, let me just go back to, but let me just go back to 5314 to show you what John means there. Okay, hope I get to the right page. Okay, so John, just like what you mean by, like, because we look at this.
Yeah. Okay. Let's pause and go through it slowly, because this is probably a lot of stuff flying at people at once. But here's what the statute says, right? Considering the need to avoid impeding or controlling the export or import of monetary instruments, whatever the hell that means, and the need to avoid burdening unreasonably a person making a transaction with a foreign financial agency, who knows what that means?
Right.
As Justice Jackson pointed out, in the Bittner case, right? But here we go. The Secretary of the Treasury shall require a resident or citizen of the United States in doing business to keep records report, file reports, blah, blah, blah. Now, my point is that the scope of that applies only to the Treasury Secretary, right? There's nothing that an individual is required to do under that. It's solely a directive to the Treasury Secretary, to do this, that, and the other thing, right? Now, back to 521. I mean, that's the basic provision, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, so now we go back here. All right, and you want to go down to, I think it was 4, was it 5? Yeah, here we go. Foreign, yeah. Now, if we just look at so now they're getting ready to impose a penalty, right, for non-compliance with 5314. But here's what they say. The Secretary of the Treasury may impose a civil penalty on any person who violates or causes a violation of any provision of 5314 doesn't apply to individuals. It applies only to the Treasury Secretary. Therefore, there is no way, unless you really stretch the meaning of the law somehow, there's no way that an individual can be penalized under that section. Now, I understand they're doing it, right?
Oh yeah, they're doing it. Oh, they're doing it.
But the point here is that it's completely nonsensical given the structure of the statute. Now, I don't know, why this was not raised, as part of the whole Bittner thing. I think it probably should have been.
It's a missed opportunity, unfortunately.
Well, it's a missed opportunity. There's no question about it. I mean, there we go. I mean, that's another interesting problem. But that also shows you, I think, what happens when, so this dumb law is created in 1970. Who the hell knows what was going on at that time? I mean, where were you in 1970? Were you alive?
I was waiting. I was in heaven, waiting for that little Golden Globe,
Okay.
waiting for that special night.
And you were waiting for the FBAR.
I was waiting. Well, my parents waited to actually New Year's Eve. My dad told me the story.
I was learning my ABCs.
Yeah. My mom. This is a true story. She didn't think she could get pregnant if she was nursing. So, thank God for ignorance. So yes. Anyway, so yes, I was 1970 was not quite there yet.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. I mean, maybe you should do a podcast, A World Without Anthony.
It was an awful place. It was an awful place.
Awful place. But anyway, look, I mean, this is just so messed up, right? In so many ways. I mean, not the least of which is the statute 5314 is, I think, fundamentally incomprehensible. And that goes back to my earlier point that the regulations are now being used to interpret the statute instead of the other way around. I mean, this is awful stuff. And personally, I think it's an opportunity while, these political parties are out saying, we want the offshore vote. We value you're important. We want the offshore vote. I think the answer should be, you know what? No possibility of getting the offshore vote without a clear commitment on the part of the executive branch, who has total control over the regulations, that this tyranny, this punishment for my local accounts, okay, is going to end. And by the way, to be clear, it's interesting that people seem to have forgotten this. Bittner was being penalized for years that he was not a U.S. resident. He was living in Romania on his Romanian accounts. So, those people who imagine that, oh no, this just applies, it doesn't apply to Americans abroad, are clearly wrong. And, you let them continue this, and they're going to continue. Now, one other point on this. So, in the Canadian election in 2018 or 19, the leader of the Conservative Party, a couple weeks before the election, they found out he was an American, right? He was an accidental American.
Oh, I gotta get it.
That was a bit of a brouhaha, but I think not for the right reasons. Can you imagine the head of state another country being subject to FBAR penalties? I mean, you must be kidding me, right?
Yeah.
That is the position of U.S. Treasury, and that is why I think generally that countries need to adopt a policy that anybody who is a U.S. citizen is absolutely 100% barred from public office, right? Because of the coercive nature of U.S. citizenship. I mean, how in God's name can you have, living in your country as a high-level member of the government, somebody who, from a tax point of view, is nothing but a sacred instrument of tax-based erosion because of citizenship taxation, but secondly, is subject to the coercive effects of FBAR? I mean, it just can't be done. And countries need to wise up to this.
It would be nice if they did. Now, there's I can think of one more practical problem with the FBAR. And most of you would know this. And Keith, I'm going to get your impact on this one. Maybe I'll load it in a very, very loaded hypothetical question for you, Keith.
Sure.
So the FBAR, interesting thing. So it's a requirement that you have to report your foreign bank accounts. Now, it may be a requirement too if you are foreign bank accounts of a large corporation, and that you're the signatory and you didn't file. Okay, right. So that's one situation. Say you have, oh yeah, I was the controller of a foreign, agency, and yeah, the account did get up to $100 million US, in US equivalent, and I've never filed an FBAR.
Right.
And now, okay, let's think about that. Now let's think about this scenario: a school teacher who doesn't file an FBAR for her pension in the UK, which by the way isn't taxable by the US.
Right.
Which one of those two, and the pension's only worth about $200,000. Which one of those two do you think get the full brunt of the IRS?
Good question. Good
But
question.
first, the large multinational corporation that doesn't file an FBAR,
Yeah.
or the retired school teacher who has about a $200,000 retirement in the UK. Which one do you think would get the full brunt of the US of the IRS and the government?
Probably the school teacher, but
Yes.
if I may throw something into the mix here, gentlemen,
Yes.
that I think it's important to bring up, and tell me what you think. Because as you know, I did some I took a look, and the FBARs that are filed in the last year that the data is available is 2022. When you take homeland Americans and Americans overseas, how do I put this? There's not a lot of FBARs that are being filed. It's a nominal amount. So the majority of Americans overseas don't file FBARs. So what do you do with that information? You see what I mean? So how serious is this FBAR situation? Is my question. And
Okay.
don't get me wrong. I think everybody needs to make comments on the FBAR. Don't get me wrong. It's absolutely abhorrent what's being done. But when you look at the data, there's not a lot of people filing FBARs. So what do you do with that?
Well, Keith, you're bringing a very different perspective to the point I was going to make. Is that there's an inequitable prosecution of FBAR penalties, and if this was a serious thing, if this was actually a serious thing that people didn't report FBARs, why does the government only go after those who are weak? And look, what I could tell you, and I've done probably, my firm has probably done more OVDP opt-outs than any other firm. We were really aggressive. And we've taken over a lot of cases for other people who have opted out, who couldn't afford to pay that penalty structure. And one thing I could tell you with very absolute certainty is the IRS will impose. The IRS is looking for people who are elderly and frail to impose FBAR penalties against, who their retirement is the basis. It's like they didn't report their retirement or inheritance they didn't know that they had. They inherited money from their dad, like, oh yeah, I got a couple $1 million here. I'm going to live on it for the rest of my life. Well, you didn't report it, so now, and you're near the end of your life. So now we're going to come after you as hard as we possibly can. Maybe your spouse died too. Maybe you're a widow. Maybe you're a widow and this is all you have and you didn't even know. It wasn't even your stuff. You didn't report it. That is who the IRS is most vicious after, because guess what? It's hard for them to fight back. Even if they do have the resources to pay for an attorney, the emotional cost of people trying to remember, they had a hard time remembering yesterday. And you're trying to get them to, well, what'd you do here? Why didn't you file your FBAR? I don't even know what you're talking about. That is what the IRS loves to go after. They love to go after people who don't even know what day it is. That's what they do.
So I'm confused. I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I definitely don't get me wrong. I believe everything that you're saying because you deal with it all the time. But where I have a hard time, and maybe both of you can help me understand, is that if the majority of the people overseas who are Americans don't file FBARs, there's a whole bunch of people that the IRS or FinCEN can go after, but they don't. So I'm kind of confused. You see what I mean? I deal with so many people who don't file FBARs because they have nothing in the United States, and they're not even in the U.S. tax system, so they don't file FBARs. So where's the problem for them?
They're not in the U.S. tax system, right? I mean, that's the reason they don't.
Okay.
I know, but so Keith, I guess I'm trying to. So what you're saying is, well, we don't really have. There's no real, because of the way this law is enforced, this regulation is enforced, because there is no law. Because of the way this regulation is enforced, we have a comical, absurd result.
Right. That
you're saying it's important on one level, but then on the other level, you have no interest in going after people who don't file them.
That's where I'm confused, Anthony. Not but what you're saying or what John is saying. It's like there's an incongruence. There's a disconnect with the whole.
Well, and I think it could be explained that the FBAR law was never passed because it's a dumb idea. Because you're trying to, and that's why Congress never created the law. Because this is a really dumb idea. And what we're seeing is the logical consequence of this incredibly dumb FBAR regulation that FinCEN created. They got the power, but they don't have the wisdom, right? That's the thing. Hey, look at what we can do. We can do. It's like, great. Now look at what you can do. So why aren't you doing it if it's that important? So it's very selective. So, and I think it just gets back to the point. It's the, as John said so many times, the only value to the government is in the unfiled FBAR.
Yeah.
And I would say this against the right person, because if it's the wrong person, and I'll be guys, and I'll be honest, the stuff I see that comes across my desk every day, is that very wealthy people, and I mean the really wealthy people, not someone who's doing okay. I mean, when your net worth is in the billions, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, the truly wealthy families, they have incredibly unelaborate tax evasion schemes. It's so obvious what they do, and the government doesn't touch them. Now, could it be because they donate to the political parties? Could it be that? I wonder.
Or it's so bloody complicated, they just don't have the...
No, it's actually not all that complicated. No, it's actually not.
Okay.
How they evade taxes is actually really, you got to be kidding me. And I'll give you how they do. A loan from the government. Oh, my company gave me a loan. And they never pay it back. That's what it is. That's what they do. And it's so obvious and it's so clear. And the IRS knows about this, but they don't go after them because, well, those are the wrong people to go after. But you know what? People who aren't politically connected, yes, let's go after them with everything we have. Let's go after them with everything we have.
I think the difference is probably this, okay? Primarily this, not the sole difference. So I would imagine that really wealthy people, first of all, I think they're probably very, very tax compliant. I think also they,
some are.
Well, I think that they're generally more supportive of government. Okay, I don't
they own it.
That there's a perception that there are all these dissidents out there, etc. But look, Keith, to provide a partial answer, what you're talking about, and an observation on this, okay? If you look at the reported cases on FBAR, what you'll see is that very often they're associated with non-compliant people trying to come into compliance, okay, for whatever reason. Many of them were associated with offshore voluntary disclosure programs, et cetera, et cetera. So, those who are non-compliant forever, they're not on the radar. So, why would you expect them to get penalties, right?
Well then, John, if I could quickly interrupt here, because then what you're saying, we have a practical problem that you're encouraging non-compliance with the way that the FBAR, well, they're definitely not going to use it now because of the way that you guys have been assessing these penalties.
Yeah, I'd say that's right. I think that's right. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly not a perception that it's easy to come into, compliance with the U.S. tax and regulatory regime. Because if you're faced with a situation where, there's a presumption of penalty and stuff like that, that's not exactly an incentive to, fix past compliance problems, is it?
No, not really. No, not really to doing that.
If you look at these cases, it's amazing. Now, a lot of those were opt-outs. They were either opt-outs from the OBDP, OBDI, right? Or they were people who were not accepted into those programs, because they waited too late. But what is I think very, very clear is the viciousness that the IRS went after many of the opt-outs, right? Got into these programs, then realized that it's just really the penalties are disproportionate, so they opted out. And I think in their minds, they were looking at the tax penalties, right? Which is a different issue, the Title 26 penalties. But they forgot about, the Title 31. So I think what the IRS was using was supercharging the FBAR penalties to make sure that the government recovered what they would have had there been no opt-out under the OVDP programs. Okay, that's what I think may have been happening. But whatever, okay, it is absolutely vile. Okay, it is. I mean, it's proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is no relationship between the administration of the U.S. tax and regulatory regime and any normal sense of morality. And, you know, as I think we've talked about before, you can tell everything about a country, you know, through its tax policies. Right?
And yeah, we know a lot about America. We probably know more about America than everybody else, don't we? Because we are incredibly familiar with the intimacies of.
Well, all you have to do is look at this stuff. There's what else is there to know?
Right. What else do you need to know? Right. This is you know, and so and this is where I want to take it. So what I want to do, because I'm going to create my comment, and it's probably going to be about 2 pages. And so I want to create my comment, and I want to circle back next week to go over my comment with you. And I was hoping you two would also create your comments and share them, that we could share them next week to go over what exactly I'm going to say. Would you guys be game?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so that's what we're going to do, and this is just and I think our takeaway, you know, here is that, you know, what can we say about the FBAR? Well, the FBAR, there is no FBAR law; it's an FBAR regulation that is that turns the presumption of innocence on its head, and practical effects are has no intelligence value, presumes a whole bunch of people to be criminals who aren't. There's inequitable persecution. It's a duplicative requirement. There's a Form 8938 that exists. It hits and it hits people most vulnerable. That it's a tool to punish. The tool is not used against the powerful. Not at all. The invented tool, because it's not even a law, but this invented tool is not used against the more powerful. Rather, it's used to keep people down. And that's really the truth. So that's what we have there. So I want to, again, show you guys where we're going to do next week is that we're going to create our comments. Mine's going to be about a 2-page letter, I imagine. And we're going to go over that. And because this is where we're going to leave it right here. I'm going to upload, and maybe I'll do mine live. I think next week I'll upload it here, and we'll do it live where I upload my file. So we could do that together. It'll be fun, and then we'll see what happens. Because honestly, what is it possible? So I guess, you know, in the scheme of things, gentlemen, John, do you think it's possible that that Treasury actually looks at these comments?
Yeah, I do. I mean, if you look at the sort of progression from 2011, I think that there's, you know, a gradual growing awareness. Now, you know, whether that would make a difference is obviously a different issue altogether. But I think that in closing, I would like to say that I think it is extremely important for individual Americans abroad to get comments in. Okay, because the way I see it, one of 2 things happens. Either they listen to them and pay attention, which would be good, or they ignore them, which is actually also not good, but helpful down the road, because it's one more example of, you know, the U.S. government's, you know, ignoring individual citizens, et cetera, which, you know, I think is going to be necessary down the road, you know, in a future lawsuit. So, you know, nothing to be lost by putting in a comment. I think everything to be gained. And I think that people need to do this. You know, it's an opportunity, right? You know,
right.
In question of trying to get somebody's attention, it's hello, you know, send your stuff in. And they need to do that.
Yeah, Keith, you know, and I think you always hear the complaints. Well, what can we do about it? There's nothing we can do about it. Well,
Right.
Here it is.
Right, exactly.
Right. So hopefully everyone
will
will
have your voice possibly heard.
It's possibly heard. Well, and I would say this: the more comments, the better. It's hard to ignore a lot of people.
Right.
So if you're tired of being ignored, make your comment. Again, you know, it's it's in the super chat and also in the description below where you could leave a comment.
You know, I think also, Anthony, I think there's another point here that needs to be made, and this is more broadly. I mean, I never know who watches these things, etc.
The smartest people in the world.
Okay, but I think what's important is that all resident Americans need to understand their future is to look at how the United States treats its citizens abroad.
It's all a trial.
And as it stands now, Americans don't know this. I mean, it's fascinating. There's an article in the Boston Globe on Friday talking about all these Americans who, might leave the country,
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This sort of stuff. And there were hundreds of comments, but there was nothing in the article about the U.S. tax regulatory regime, etc. And, reading that, you get the impression that these people think they're free to leave the country.
Well, of course, John. You shouldn't. Of course.
No, you are property of the United States government.
Yeah.
They own your soul. Come on, man.
And that's the message for resident Americans, okay? That
Right.
you're nothing but dogs subject to the shock of the invisible fence.
All right. Well, all right. Well, I want to thank everyone who's joined us today. I want to thank Keith and John so much for everything. And I do want to say, by the way, if you are looking for a tax firm who actually sees the IRS as maybe not your friend, but wants to fight things, tooth and nail, make sure that you're represented. We don't care if the IRS is happy. We want you to be happy. Go to irsmedic.com offshore. We do a lot of offshore disclosures, and then we actually try to avoid and lower your penalty. We often can block penalties from your disclosure. We're pretty good at that. And then sometimes maybe a streamlined disclosure isn't even necessary. So we look for imaginative, creative, but legal ways to get you into compliance with the least amount of risk and to avoid some of the disasters that we've been talking about. And unfortunately, a lot of these other people didn't necessarily have the greatest representation, and that's why they got hammered, unfortunately. I think it's unfair. I think and I've had clients of ours who have been hammered unfairly, including that UK UK retired school teacher with $200,000 in her retirement fund. She was one of our clients. She still got, and the U.S. still upheld non-willful FBAR penalties against them because, again, that's what the government does. So again, I want you all to tune in next week. So if you haven't subscribed, turn on notifications, please do so, because we're going to go over our homework. I'm going to go over my homework with you, where I'm going to articulate my comments exactly. And by the way, if you have your own comments, please share them with us. The comments that you're going to leave, and you want any feedback, let me know. By the way, if you want to be on the show to discuss your particular situation that happened, guess what? I'm going to share my email right now. Here's my email, aparent@irsmedic.com. I do like sharing this email because the people who reach out to me are really, really smart, I got to say. So if you're really smart, you want to reach out to me, there's my email. Go for it. I really want to hear from you. So with that, I want to thank my host, my guest today. This is Anthony Parent for IRS Medic. Thanks for watching.